What's up YouTube? This is Kyle with Carve Creative. I don't know if you guys know this, but I have a shop called Arnie's Stoke Shack and I'm part of the Stoke Life Service Network. So today I'm going to show you guys how I change tires. It's what I do the most in my shop. There's a couple of things that I do that might save you some time. So I'm going to show you how I do it, but I'm also going to give you a couple hints if you don't have the same tools as me, how you can accomplish changing a tire. So this is the Burris SS22. It's a slick tire. I'm guessing it's gonna give me a pretty smooth ride, especially compared to the stock tire. And it's also gonna give me a little bit more stability because it's not as rounded. So whenever I'm taking apart a board, the most important thing is remembering where all your screws go. And luckily on the Pint, there's only two main screw sizes, so it's not as hard to do. But on the XR, it can be tricky keeping track of where things go. And then I always find that it's easiest to take off this handle. Some people leave it on, but I like to just take it off because it makes it a lot easier to slide the tire out from those rails. Got to be a little more careful with those cable clips on the Pint because it's made of plastic, whereas on the XR it's metal, so they're a little more fragile, especially in cold weather. So these screws here in the corners are the only long screws, so all the bolts are going to be the exact same size. These are the only ones that are going to be a different size for your main rail screws. So just always be cautious of that and make sure you're putting them back in the right spot. Other than that, they're all the same, and it's a lot easier to put back together than the XR in that sense. Okay. So here you got the controller of the board. Looks identical to the Pint. I really see no difference at all, which is fine because actually the design of that controller is pretty slick and seems to be really resilient. There's our bumper. Nice little spot for an air tag. If you have an air tag, it's an easy way to keep track of your board. So that was a nice improvement. But there is definitely some wasted space in that bumper. And I think Jeff from Float Life said this, it would have been a good opportunity to throw a handle in there, but unfortunately they didn't do that. That's okay. So I'm gonna remove this motor plug here. And I find that it's a really tight, the wire is really tight in there, so I find that it's a little better if you can wedge it out from the rails. And that gives you some slack to unplug it and then just bring it underneath like that. So now all I have to do is remove the 4 axle bolts. So other people do this differently, but like I said, I like to keep everything together. For me, it makes it easier to put everything back if I don't have the rails completely apart. And then really all I have to worry about is putting on the handle at the end, but this makes it nice and easy for me to move on and do the next thing. And when I go back to put everything back together, it should be a lot easier. So I'm gonna be taking off this Burris tire now. If you guys wanna watch the review of this tire, you can click in the link below and see how it performs. We all really enjoyed it a lot, but like I said, we're just gonna try out something new. So anytime I'm working on this, I'm just holding the motor like this, I always put these boards down so that I can rest this in the middle and that my wire doesn't get pinched anyway. Because right now what I want to do is remove this valve core. And you can get any sort of valve core removal tool. I really like this tool because I can also use it to replace the valve down the road if I need to. It's gonna get loud, I'm sure. So now that I have the valve core removed, I'm gonna break the bead on both sides. When I do this, I use my bearing press. If you don't have a bearing press, I'm gonna show you another way that you can do this. But essentially all I'm gonna do is put pressure right on the outside of that rim until I break it free. So that side's done. I'm gonna flip it over, do the other side. All right, so now that tire's ready to get off. So if you don't have a bearing press, you can usually accomplish breaking the bead with stuff laying around the house. And I'm going to make sure that my axle block is in between the boards so I don't do any damage to the motor cable. And you're just gonna set your board up right next to this inner part of the rim here, or the outer part of the rim. And I'm just gonna stomp on it. Flip it around, do the same exact thing. So anytime you're taking the tire off of the hub, I recommend gloves. It can be frustrating, especially if you're in a cold garage. It's very hard to get the tire off sometimes. So I definitely recommend wearing gloves. But if you look on the hub here, this side does not have a groove. This side does have a groove. So when I'm gonna remove this tire, I'm gonna use this groove to my advantage to lift the tire up over the hub. So I have it wedged in that groove right down here. Then I'm gonna grab my tire removal tool, which I got this from Onewheel parts. Bring it underneath and just get that tire over that hub, just get it started, just like that. And then I still have it in this groove right here, and that's gonna make things so much easier because now I'm just gonna take my thumbs, I'm gonna put pressure on the hub right here, and I'm gonna take my fingers and peel it up over the hub, just like that. And then same thing on this side. I'm using that groove to my advantage, putting pressure up here, and just peel it right off there like that. All right, so for getting this bead to set properly and easily, there's a couple things that make life a lot easier. I definitely recommend using Bead Buddy. And when I use the Bead Buddy, all I'm gonna do is take a little bit and put it on my finger and then run it along the inner part of your tire here. And I make sure to get the front and the back of it because the back of it has a little lip. And if you get it on there, it just seems to make the tire install a lot easier. So I do that on both sides. And then on Burris tires, there is no directional arrow, but they do have these 3 paint marks. You want those 3 paint marks to be on the same side as your valve, and you want your valve to be somewhere centered in between those 3. So when I do that, I'm making sure that here's my valve right here, here's my paint. I'm gonna make sure that it's up facing the same direction as the valve. And I'm just gonna slowly work this tire on there just like that. Now that I have that one side on, I'm gonna rotate my paint marks so they're right by the valve. I'm essentially just gonna start in the corner and work my way around. Kind of just like when you're installing those rim savers from Float Life. Same concept, just a lot easier. So now that I have that on there, I need to set the bead. So now I have my paint marks centered over that valve right there. So now I'm gonna put my valve core back in and we are going to set the bead. So I got my valve core tool. I'm gonna install that, get it nice and tight. So I got the valve core back in and I'm gonna use this strap right here. This is a containment strap and there's a couple different versions of these. This one is from Onewheel parts and it works really well. But if you don't have one of these, I'm gonna show you something else that you can do to accomplish the same thing. So before I put my containment strap on, I'm gonna fill the tire with air so it just starts to take shape. Just about there. Now that it's started to get its shape, I'm gonna put the containment strap on. And the main purpose of this thing, well, there's 2 different things. It's gonna kind of hold everything in place to make it easier for the bead to set, but it's also a safety thing because if you put too much air in these tires, there is a chance that they explode and you can get seriously injured. So I always recommend using some sort of containment strap, or you can use a bucket, which we'll show you. All right, so I'm gonna fill this thing up now. You're gonna hear 2 different pops. It's each bead setting. There's one.
Crap out of me.
So if you do not have a containment strap, there's another way you can do it, and I'm going to show you. Here's one of my old XR tires that I'm just using as an example. So I'm going to put my valve core in. One-handed. And I'm going to put it in the bucket with the valve facing upward and make sure that I don't put too much stress on this cable. So I'll kind of wrap the cable around, set it right in the bucket like that. There's one, and there's number two. So now to get it back out of the bucket, you're gonna need to take the air out because it's not going anywhere right now. And that is your makeshift tire containment system. All right, so after I put my tire sealant in there, it's now time to put the valve core back in. And after that, I can fill the tire up to whatever my desired tire pressure is, which for me, I go around 26 PSI. Okay, so on the Pint, you're gonna see these two blocks. These are for your axles. And basically there's a little groove on these blocks right here. And that groove is gonna match up with the groove on your actual axles of your motor. So all I'm gonna do now is make sure that these are facing down, and I'm gonna lift up, and both sides, when you do the back side where the cable is here, where your motor cable is, make sure that it gets tucked back into the rails, otherwise it's gonna get caught up. And then something else that's very important is using a thread lock compound. I really recommend the Vibratite. I've watched videos where they do tests with Vibratite and Loctite, and Vibratite gel seems to be the best option. It also doesn't leave behind the crusty residue that Loctite will leave behind. But it's very important that when you use this stuff, especially like on an XR with inner hub bolts, it needs to have 24 hours to cure. So on the XRs, the inner hub bolts will start knocking, and people always have that issue. And what they do is they'll put new Loctite on it, or they'll just tighten it, and the same thing happens again. So if you're having that issue, take your inner hub bolts out completely, clean out the threads if possible, put this Vibratite gel on there, and let it sit for 24 hours, and you'll have much better results. So I just put a little bit on. Make sure it wraps around the threads. You don't want to use too much of it. Okay, so now that I have that on there, I'm gonna start it by hand. There we go. And I like get one on each side of the board. So I got that one on that side. Now I'm gonna come back and put one over here. Sorry, you can't see this. My bad. And I'm just getting them started. I'm not gonna fully tighten anything down until the board is completely put back together. So I got that one started. I'm gonna get this one started. And I'm essentially just gonna get these two with a state where they're hand tight. Not even fully, just enough where it's grabbing good. This one's tough to get back in. So I'm just going about that much. I can go back to the other side now, get my second one in. Now I'm gonna put my cable covers back on. You gotta be really careful with those tiny Phillips screws. They strip very easily. So you do not want to over tighten them in any way, or you're gonna have a hell of a time drilling those out. side's good. So when you're plugging in the motor here, you gotta be really careful with these little prongs. There's the 3 bigger ones, but then there's also a few really small ones, and those can bend easily, and I have had customers bring me their board with those bent, and it'll cause the board to drive funky. So you gotta be really careful when you're plugging these back in. So that's why I keep this thing tucked underneath here to make sure I have some slack. And I'm basically looking for my reference point. And all I'm gonna do now is bring this thing up, and I'm gonna tighten this front nut here until I feel the first click. And that's ready to go. So now I can take my bumpers, new and improved bumpers, get those on there, and start putting all of my screws back in. Okay, so now I'm gonna flip this back around, and you're gonna see, like I talked about, the one spot where you're gonna use these longer screws is gonna be on these corners on both sides of the board. So get those in. The last thing I'm gonna do before I put my fender delete on is get this handle, because you cannot take the handle on and off with the fender delete on. So you make sure you do that, otherwise you'll have to do what I've done many times and take it back off to put it back on. This is an improvement that I hope they bring to the GT, is this guard here. This thing really helps keep debris from getting out of the controller area. And I'm guessing we're gonna see the same thing on the GT fender delete. But little things like that were great improvements on the Pint. The only things that weren't great were things that they did to cut costs of production. And the first generation of Pint, there were some issues with the charging port and a few other things. And over time, they've slowly improved those processes, and it's good to see. So now, this is pretty much ready to go. The last thing that I'm gonna do is I have a torque tool here, and I have this thing set to 20 foot-pounds. I'm gonna take a milk crate, and I actually learned this from Sean Nelson in Canada. He's the curb killer. I watched a video, and he seems to be very thorough and do things correctly. So ever since I saw that, I started setting my boards up on a crate, and basically his idea was you're keeping any weight off. So I started in one corner. Now I'm gonna flip it around. I'm gonna do the opposite corner. So it's essentially like doing a star pattern. Then I can go back here. And then flip it back around for the last one. So this guy is ready to do a test ride, and I don't know if you guys have ever done a tire change, but these annoying stickers leave behind a really nasty adhesive, and it'll pick up like dust and a bunch of other crap. So what I use for that is adhesive remover. Get rid of this. And this board is now golden and ready to shred. All right, so that is how I change a tire. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope some people got to learn some things. If you don't feel like you can do something like this on your own, make sure to visit StokeLifeService.com, and you will be able to find the service center that's closest to you. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.